Part 3. The voice that rang out was low and steady, laced with menace. Lydia and Damien froze, the air around them thick with tension. From the shadows of the corridor, a figure emerged, cloaked in black and wearing a mask that concealed their features. The glint of gold on their hand, a ring with the blackthorn crest, confirmed Lydia's worst fears. "Who are you?" Damien demanded, stepping in front of Lydia protectively. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they reached up, pulling off the mask with deliberate slowness. The face beneath was both familiar and shocking. "Lady Blackthorn," Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. The matriarch's piercing eyes met Lydia's, her expression calm and composed. She seemed entirely unbothered by the revelation, as though she had planned this moment meticulously. "You're surprised," Lady Blackthorn said, her voice carrying an edge of amusement. "I expected more from you, Miss Harrington." "Why?" Lydia asked, her voice rising with anger and disbelief. "Why would you kill your own husband?" Lady Blackthorn tilted her head slightly, as if considering her answer. "You misunderstand. I didn't kill Charles. But I did everything in my power to stop him from destroying this family." Damien's jaw tightened. "Destroying it? Or exposing its secrets?" Lady Blackthorn's gaze shifted to him, her expression hardening. "You think you know so much, Damien. But you've always been a child playing with fire. The Blackthorn legacy is far more dangerous than you can comprehend." Lydia stepped forward, her fear replaced by fury. "You're lying. I saw the mirror. Charles was murdered by someone wearing that ring. And you assume it was me?" Lady Blackthorn said, her voice as cold as the stone walls around them. "Perhaps it's time you learned the truth." The truth revealed. Lady Blackthorn gestured toward the mirror, her movements sharp and deliberate. "Ask it again. See what it shows you this time." Lydia hesitated, her heart racing. She glanced at Damien, who nodded, his expression tense. Steeling herself, Lydia turned to the mirror. "Who killed Charles Blackthorn?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. The glass rippled again, the distorted image of Charles and his attacker reappearing. This time, the scene shifted, growing clearer. The shadowy figure was no longer obscured. As the attacker turned toward the mirror, their face was revealed. Lydia gasped, her blood running cold. It wasn't Lady Blackthorn. It was someone else entirely. "Damien," Lydia whispered, turning to look at him in disbelief. Damien's face was ashen, his eyes wide with shock. "That's not possible." It isn't," Lady Blackthorn interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension. "That's not Damien. Look closer." Lydia turned back to the mirror, her breath catching as she examined the reflection more closely. The man in the image looked almost identical to Damien, but there were subtle differences, the lines of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. "It's not you," Lydia murmured. "It's someone who looks like you." "Charles's brother," Damien said, his voice low and grim. "Gabriel." Lydia stared at him in confusion. "Gabriel? But I thought—" "He's supposed to be dead," Damien finished. "He disappeared years ago." Lady Blackthorn nodded, her expression dark. "Gabriel was always a problem. Reckless. Greedy. He envied Charles and the power that came with the Blackthorn name. When Charles uncovered the truth about the mirror and the rose, Gabriel saw an opportunity. He wanted the artifact for himself, but Charles refused to let him have it. So Gabriel killed him," Lydia said, the pieces falling into place. Lady Blackthorn's gaze turned distant. "And then Gabriel disappeared. I suspected he went into hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. It seems that moment has come. A deadly decision." The weight of the revelation pressed down on Lydia. Gabriel Blackthorn, Charles's long-lost brother, had killed him to claim the rose and whatever power it held. And now, Gabriel was back, willing to kill anyone who stood in his way. "What do we do now?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. "We prepare," Lady Blackthorn said. "Gabriel will stop at nothing to take what he believes is his. But we have the advantage. He doesn't know what you've uncovered." "Won't he suspect?" Damien asked, his tone skeptical. "Let him," Lady Blackthorn said coldly. "It will draw him out. And when he comes, we'll be ready." Lydia felt a chill at the matriarch's words. There was a ruthlessness in her tone that made it clear she was willing to do whatever it took to protect her family's secrets, even if it meant sacrificing others. As they left the chamber, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the lines between ally and enemy were growing increasingly blurred. Lady Blackthorne might not have killed Charles, but her motives were far from pure. And Damien, for all his loyalty, carried his own shadowy connections to the family. Midnight intrigue. Later that night, Lydia sat alone in her room, staring out at the mist-shrouded gardens. The events of the day replayed in her mind, each revelation raising more questions than answers. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Damien, his expression troubled. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside. "What is it?" Lydia asked, sensing his unease. "There's something I haven't told you," Damien admitted. "Something about Gabriel." Lydia's heart sank. "What?" "I knew he was alive," Damien confessed. "I've seen him, recently. He approached me, trying to recruit me into whatever he's planning. He wants the rose, Lydia. And he'll do anything to get it." Lydia stared at him, her mind reeling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know who to trust," Damien said. "And I still don't." Before Lydia could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the hallway. Both of them froze, their gazes locking. "Stay here," Damien said, moving toward the door. But Lydia grabbed his arm, her voice firm. "I'm not staying behind. Not this time." Together, they stepped into the hallway, their footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. The sound of distant voices reached them, faint but urgent. As they approached the source of the commotion, Lydia's pulse quickened. The mirror chamber door stood ajar, its edges glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Inside, the air was thick with tension. And at the center of the room stood Gabriel Blackthorne, his face a twisted mirror of Damien's, holding the blood-red rose in his hand. Gabriel Blackthorne turned slowly, the crimson rose in his hand gleaming as though it pulsed with a life of its own. His striking resemblance to Damien was even more unnerving in the dim, flickering light of the chamber. Where Damien's features were marked by calm determination, Gabriel's were sharp with menace, his smile cold and calculating. "Well, well," Gabriel said, his voice smooth and mocking. "The prodigal son returns. And with company, no less." His piercing gaze shifted to Lydia, lingering with unnerving intensity. "What are you doing here, Gabriel?" Damien demanded, his voice steady but taut with anger. Gabriel chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "You've always been so predictable, Damien. Always the loyal soldier, always cleaning up the messes others make. But this," he gestured to the rose in his hand. "This is beyond you. Beyond any of us." Lydia stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "You killed Charles for that rose. Why? What does it do?" Gabriel's smile widened, his teeth gleaming in the faint light. "Ah, the outsider. The artist. I've heard about you, Miss Harrington. You've been stirring up quite the storm in Blackthorne Manor." "Answer the question," Lydia said sharply, refusing to be intimidated. Gabriel's expression darkened. "Charles was a fool. He believed the rose could save this cursed family, that its power could cleanse the blood on our hands. But he didn't understand. The rose is not salvation, it's control. A power so ancient and absolute, it could bend this world to my will. You killed your own brother for that?" Damien spat, his fists clenched. Gabriel's gaze snapped to him, his eyes blazing with fury. "Don't you dare lecture me about loyalty. You have no idea what I've endured, what this family has taken from me." Damien took a step closer, his voice cold and unyielding. "You betrayed your family. You betrayed Charles. And now you're trying to destroy everything he fought to protect. And what did he protect?" Gabriel sneered. "A legacy of lies? A house of secrets built on the bones of the innocent? No, Damien. I'm not destroying Blackthorne, I'm rebuilding it. In my image. The fight for the rose." Before anyone could react, Gabriel raised the rose, its petals shimmering with an unnatural light. The chamber seemed to respond, the air vibrating with a low hum that made Lydia's skin crawl. "Don't," Damien warned, his voice deadly. Gabriel's smile was wicked. "You can't stop me." With a sudden burst of movement, Damien lunged at Gabriel, tackling him to the ground. The rose flew from Gabriel's hand, landing a few feet away. Its glow dimmed slightly, as though weakened by the separation. "Lydia, get the rose." Damien shouted, struggling to pin Gabriel down. Lydia hesitated only for a moment before darting toward the rose. But Gabriel was faster than she anticipated. He threw Damien off with a surge of strength and scrambled to his feet, his hand reaching for the rose just as Lydia grabbed it. For a moment, their hands touched, both gripping the fragile stem. A jolt of energy surged through Lydia, her vision flooding with images, flashes of the Blackthorn family's bloody history, faces and moments she couldn't comprehend. "Let go." Gabriel snarled, yanking hard. Lydia cried out as the thorns bit into her skin, but she refused to release her grip. "You won't win," she said through gritted teeth. Damien sprang forward, pulling Gabriel away from her with brute force. The rose slipped from both their hands, clattering to the floor. Lydia scrambled to pick it up, but the energy coursing through her made her hands tremble. The mirror behind her began to ripple again, its surface distorting violently. The entire chamber seemed to tremble, the carvings on the walls glowing faintly as though they had been awakened. "What's happening?" Lydia cried, clutching the rose. "The mirror," Damien shouted. "It's reacting to the rose." Gabriel's laugh was wild and unhinged. "Yes. The rose and the mirror are connected. Together, they unlock the power Charles was too afraid to wield." Lydia turned toward the mirror, the weight of the rose heavy in her hands. The glass pulsed, and a voice, soft, whispering, ancient, filled her ears. She couldn't understand the words, but their meaning resonated deep within her. "This isn't power," she said, her voice trembling. "It's a curse. It's why Charles tried to stop you." Gabriel's expression twisted with rage. "You don't understand. It's mine by right." Before he could move, Damien struck him again, this time with enough force to send him crashing into the wall. Gabriel slumped to the ground, dazed. "Lydia," Damien said urgently, turning to her. "The rose, it's the key. We have to destroy it. A sacrifice." Lydia stared at Damien, her mind racing. The energy from the rose still thrummed in her veins, seductive and intoxicating. She could feel its power, its potential. The voice in her head grew louder, whispering promises of strength, control, and clarity. "What if destroying it makes things worse?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We don't have a choice," Damien said firmly. "Charles tried to protect it, and it cost him his life. If Gabriel gets his hands on it again, he'll use it to tear this family apart, and anyone who gets in his way." Gabriel groaned, beginning to stir. Lydia knew they didn't have much time. She looked down at the rose, its beauty mesmerizing even as its thorns bit into her palms. She thought of Charles, of the lives that had been lost and the secrets that had poisoned Blackthorn Manor for generations. The rose was at the center of it all, a symbol of the family's curse, a source of power too dangerous to exist. Her decision was made. Lydia turned to the mirror, holding the rose aloft. "If this is what you want," she said to the ancient voice, "then take it." With all her strength, she hurled the rose at the mirror. The glass shattered on impact, the shards erupting in a cascade of light and sound. A deafening roar filled the chamber, and Lydia was thrown backward, landing hard on the stone floor. When the light faded, the mirror was gone, its frame empty and lifeless. The rose had disintegrated, its ashes scattered across the chamber floor. Aftermath. When Lydia opened her eyes, Damien was kneeling beside her, his face etched with concern. Gabriel was unconscious, his body slumped against the wall. The oppressive energy in the room had vanished, leaving behind only an eerie silence. "You did it," Damien said softly, helping her to her feet. Lydia swayed, her body weak but her resolve unbroken. "It's over," she murmured. "Not yet," Damien said, his gaze hardening as he looked at Gabriel. "We need to make sure he never tries this again." As they left the chamber, Lydia felt the weight of what she had done settle over her. The rose and the mirror were gone, but the scars they had left on Blackthorn Manor, and its inhabitants, would remain. She glanced at Damien, his jaw set with determination, and felt a flicker of hope. Together, they had survived the darkness of Blackthorn Manor. But the question lingered, what would come next? The shattered remnants of the rose and mirror had left the chamber in eerie silence, but the weight of the Blackthorn family's secrets still pressed heavily on Lydia. With Damien's help, she managed to climb the stone stairs back to the surface, her body weak but her mind racing. Gabriel was bound, unconscious, left in the chamber for Lady Blackthorn to deal with, a decision that filled Lydia with unease. The cold night air struck her like a slap as they emerged into the overgrown maze. The distant howl of the wind through the hedges made her shiver, but she pressed on, following Damien as he guided her toward the manor. "You should rest," Damien said as they reached the main doors. There's no time for rest, Lydia replied, her voice firmer than she expected. Not while Lady Blackthorn is still hiding things. She knew about the rose, the mirror, and Gabriel. She might not have killed Charles, but she's involved in this somehow. Damien nodded, his expression dark. Then we confront her, together. A veiled accusation. They found Lady Blackthorn in her study, seated by the fire as though she had been waiting for them. The flames cast sharp shadows across her face, accentuating the coldness in her eyes. You've returned, she said, her tone unreadable. Her gaze flicked to Damien, then back to Lydia. I assume you've dealt with Gabriel. He's alive, Damien said tersely. For now. Lady Blackthorn's lips pressed into a thin line. Mercy is a dangerous game, Damien. Gabriel won't hesitate to strike again the moment he finds an opening. We're not here to debate Gabriel, Lydia said, stepping forward. We're here for answers. You knew about the rose and the mirror, and you knew how dangerous they were. Why didn't you destroy them yourself? Lady Blackthorn's expression hardened. Because it wasn't my decision to make. Charles believed the rose held the power to end the curse that has plagued this family for generations. Destroying it would have meant giving up any hope of salvation. Salvation. Lydia repeated incredulously. That thing killed him. It nearly destroyed this entire family. And yet you're alive, Lady Blackthorn said, her voice sharp. You've survived the curse, Miss Harrington. Perhaps you're stronger than you realize. Lydia bristled. Don't deflect. You used me, just like you used Charles. You let me uncover your family's secrets because you didn't have the courage to face them yourself. Lady Blackthorn rose from her chair, her imposing presence filling the room. You're treading dangerous ground, Miss Harrington. Remember where you stand. This is my house, my family, and my legacy. You are an outsider, a pawn in a game you barely understand. No, Lydia said, her voice unwavering. I'm the only one who sees the truth. And I won't stop until everyone else sees it too. A shocking betrayal. As Lydia turned to leave, Damien hesitated, his gaze shifting between her and Lady Blackthorn. The tension in the room crackled like a live wire, and Lydia felt a chill creep down her spine. What are you waiting for? She asked Damien, her voice tinged with impatience. I'm sorry, he said softly. Before Lydia could react, Damien moved with startling speed, grabbing her arm and twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder as he forced her to her knees, his grip unyielding. Damien, she cried, struggling against him. What are you doing? Securing the future of this family, Lady Blackthorn said, her voice cold and final. She stepped forward, her gaze devoid of pity. You've seen too much, Miss Harrington. And you've become a liability. Lydia's mind reeled. I trusted you, she spat at Damien. You said we were in this together. Damien's jaw tightened, his face a mask of regret. I never wanted it to end like this, he said. But you don't understand what's at stake. This family can't survive another scandal. We've lost too much already. This isn't about the family, Lydia said, her voice shaking with fury. It's about power. That's all it's ever been about. Lady Blackthorn gestured to Damien. Take her to the East Wing. Lock her in the old servant quarters until we decide what to do with her. No. Lydia shouted, her heart pounding. She struggled against Damien's grip, but he was too strong. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice hollow. Locked away. The servant quarters were cold and barren, their walls stained with decades of neglect. Damien shoved Lydia inside, closing the heavy wooden door behind her. The sound of the lock clicking into place was deafening in the silence. Lydia sat on the floor, her body trembling with anger and betrayal. She stared at the faint moonlight streaming through the small barred window, her mind racing. Lady Blackthorn and Damien had turned on her. They were willing to sacrifice her to protect the Blackthorn legacy, to bury the truth along with Charles and the mirror. But Lydia wasn't ready to give up. As she scanned the room, her eyes landed on a rusted piece of metal protruding from the base of the bed frame. Crawling toward it, she pried it loose, her fingers aching with the effort. The makeshift tool wasn't much, but it might be enough to pick the lock on the door. Her heart pounded as she worked, the metal scraping against the lock. Time was running out, and she knew Lady Blackthorn wouldn't hesitate to silence her permanently. Finally, with a soft click, the lock gave way. Lydia pushed the door open, her breath catching as she stepped into the dark corridor. She had one chance to escape, and one final opportunity to expose the Blackthorne family for what they truly were. Lydia crept through the darkened corridors of the East Wing, her heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. The echo of her own footsteps made her hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the old floorboards. She tightened her grip on the rusted piece of metal she had used to free herself, though she knew it would do little against the forces she now faced. She had to make it to the garden maze. The answers lay there, she was certain of it. The mirror, the rose, Gabriel's betrayal, and Lady Blackthorne's ruthless schemes all pointed to the maze as the final piece of the puzzle. As she passed through the grand foyer, the faint sound of voices stopped her in her tracks. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. "She's more trouble than I anticipated," Lady Blackthorne said, her tone icy. "But Damien will handle her." "And if he doesn't?" came another voice, one Lydia didn't recognize. "Then I will," Lady Blackthorne replied. "This ends tonight." Lydia's blood ran cold. She had no time to waste. Into the maze. The garden was cloaked in mist, the faint glow of the moon barely penetrating the thick fog. The hedges of the maze loomed like silent sentinels, their twisting paths a labyrinth of uncertainty. Lydia hesitated only briefly before plunging into the maze, her breath visible in the cold night air. The sound of rustling leaves made her pause, her heart pounding. She turned sharply, expecting to see someone following her, but the path behind her was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, prickling at the back of her neck. Guided by intuition and fragments of Charles's journal, Lydia navigated the maze's winding paths. She recalled the cryptic phrase she had seen scrawled in his notes, "The truth lies beneath the rose." As she turned another corner, she stumbled upon the fountain at the maze's center. The water was dark and still, reflecting the faint light of the moon. In the middle of the fountain stood a statue of a rose, its petals carved with intricate detail. Lydia approached cautiously, her fingers brushing the cold stone. Something about the statue felt significant, as though it held the weight of centuries of secrets. She spotted a small inscription at the base of the statue. "To unlock the past, let blood guide the way." Her breath caught in her throat. She knew what it meant. The key to the secret. Lydia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the jagged piece of metal in her hand. The thought of spilling her own blood made her stomach churn, but she had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, she pressed the sharp edge of the metal against her palm, wincing as it broke the skin. Blood welled up, warm and red, dripping onto the stone base of the statue. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft grinding sound, the fountain began to shift. The statue slid to one side, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Lydia's pulse quickened. This was it, the final secret of Blackthorne Manor. The hidden chamber. The staircase led to a hidden chamber beneath the maze. The air was thick and cold, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Lydia's footsteps echoed as she descended, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it lay a leather-bound book. Its cover was embossed with the Blackthorne crest, and its pages were edged in gold. Lydia approached cautiously, her fingers trembling as she opened the book. The pages were filled with Charles's handwriting, notes, sketches, and revelations about the rose and the mirror. But as she read further, the truth unraveled like a thread pulled from a tapestry. The rose wasn't just a key to power. It was a curse, binding the Blackthorne family to its dark legacy. Generations of bloodshed and betrayal had been fueled by the artifact's influence, driving the family to madness and ruin. And at the heart of it all was Lady Blackthorne. Charles had discovered her secret. She had used the rose to manipulate the family for years, ensuring her control over the Blackthorne name. When he tried to destroy it, she had turned Gabriel against him, orchestrating his death to protect her power. Lydia's hands shook as she closed the book. The weight of the truth was overwhelming, but it was also liberating. She finally understood. The confrontation. As Lydia ascended the staircase, she found Lady Blackthorne waiting for her at the fountain. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her dark eyes burning with intent. "So," Lady Blackthorne said, her voice dangerously calm, "you've uncovered the truth." "All of it," Lydia said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You killed Charles. You used Gabriel to do it. And you've been using the rose to control this family for years." Lady Blackthorne smiled faintly. "And yet, here you are. Still alive. Still meddling." Not for long, came a voice behind Lydia. She turned to see Damien, his expression conflicted but resolute. He held a dagger in his hand, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. Lydia's heart sank. "Damien, don't do this. You don't have to be part of her lies." "Damien," Lady Blackthorne said sharply, her voice commanding. "End this now. Secure our future." Damien hesitated, the dagger trembling in his grip. For a moment, the air was thick with tension, the fate of Blackthorne Manor hanging in the balance. Then, with a sudden movement, Damien turned, plunging the dagger into the base of the fountain. The stone cracked, water erupting as the statue crumbled. "No!" Lady Blackthorne screamed, her composure shattering. "You're wrong," Damien said, his voice steady as he faced her. "The Blackthorne legacy doesn't belong to you anymore." A new dawn. The destruction of the fountain seemed to break the spell that had bound the family for generations. As the first rays of dawn pierced the mist, Lydia and Damien stood together, the weight of the night's events heavy on their shoulders. Lady Blackthorne was gone, her power broken, her secrets laid bare. Gabriel had fled, his fate uncertain. And Blackthorne Manor, once a symbol of darkness and control, seemed to breathe anew. "What happens now?" Lydia asked softly. Damien turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Now we rebuild. Not the legacy Lady Blackthorne wanted, but something better. Something honest." Lydia nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The darkness of Blackthorne Manor had been overwhelming, but in its place, she saw the faint glimmer of hope. Together, they turned toward the house, ready to face whatever the future held. The days that followed were marked by a strange, fragile calm. Blackthorne Manor stood quiet under a slate-gray sky, its once oppressive atmosphere softened by the absence of its most poisonous influences. Yet Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't entirely over. The echoes of the past still whispered through the house, their final chapter yet to be written. She spent her days helping Damien sort through the remnants of the Blackthorne archives. They worked in silence for the most part, unearthing fragments of a family history that was both fascinating and horrifying. But the air between them was heavy with unspoken words, the weight of everything they had endured pressing down on them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lydia found herself wandering the grounds. The garden maze loomed ahead, its paths now overgrown and wild, no longer the perfectly manicured symbol of power it had once been. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, drawn by an inexplicable urge. The maze felt different now. The oppressive energy that had once permeated it was gone, replaced by a sense of quiet melancholy. Lydia walked its winding paths, her thoughts swirling with memories of the rose, the mirror, and the lives that had been lost. When she reached the center, she stopped short. Damien was there, standing by the broken remains of the fountain. The shattered stone lay in pieces around him, the water now a still, shallow pool. He looked up as she approached, his face lit by the silver glow of the moon. "I thought I might find you here," Lydia said softly. Damien smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been coming here every night since, everything. Trying to make sense of it all." Lydia stepped closer, her gaze falling on the fragments of the rose's pedestal. "Have you?" "No," he admitted. "But I think that's the point. Some things don't make sense. Some things just are." They stood in silence for a while, the moonlight casting long shadows across the broken fountain. Lydia finally spoke, her voice hesitant. "Why did you hesitate, Damien? When Lady Blackthorne told you to kill you?" Damien interrupted, his voice heavy with regret. "Because I couldn't do it. I thought I could, for the family's sake. But when it came down to it, I realized I cared more about you than the Blackthorne name." Lydia's breath caught in her throat. "You cared about me?" Damien turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I still do. Lydia, you've seen the worst of this family, of me, and you stayed. You fought to uncover the truth when everyone else was too afraid. I've never met anyone like you." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but the scars of the past few weeks made her wary. "Damien, I don't know if I can trust you. Not after everything." "I don't blame you," he said quietly. "I've lied. I've betrayed you. But I swear, Lydia, from this moment on, I'll be honest. About everything. A new understanding." The vulnerability in Damien's voice broke through Lydia's defenses. She stepped closer, searching his face for any trace of deception, but all she saw was a man burdened by guilt and desperation. "I need time," she said finally, "to figure out where I stand, where we stand." Damien nodded, his gaze steady. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." As the silence stretched between them, Lydia's thoughts turned to Lady Blackthorne. What happens to the manor now? And the family? "Lady Blackthorne left," Damien said. "She's retreated to one of the family's estates in the countryside. I doubt she'll return. As for the family, they'll either adapt or fade away. The power they clung to is gone." "And Gabriel?" Damien's expression darkened. "He's out there somewhere. I'll find him eventually. He won't escape justice." Closure. As they walked back to the manor together, the weight on Lydia's shoulders began to lift. The secrets of Blackthorn Manor had been exposed, its power dismantled. But in the quiet moments of the moonlit night, she realized that the story wasn't just about the house or its cursed legacy. It was about the people, those who had been lost and those who remained. Lydia turned to Damien as they reached the front steps. "Do you think the Blackthorn name can ever mean something good?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But if it's possible, it'll be because of people like you." She smiled faintly, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "Then maybe there's hope for all of us." As they stepped inside, the faint strains of the wind carried a final whisper through the halls, a reminder of the darkness they had faced, and the light they had fought to bring. For the first time in years, Blackthorn Manor was at peace. Epilogue. Months later, Lydia stood in a gallery in London, surrounded by paintings that told the story of her time at Blackthorn Manor. The exhibition was called Shadows of the Rose, and it had drawn curious onlookers from across the city. As she wandered through the gallery, she felt a familiar presence beside her. Damien, dressed in a dark suit, stood quietly at her side. He didn't speak, but his presence was steady, a reminder that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still theirs to shape. When the exhibition ended, they walked out into the crisp evening air together. The shadow of Blackthorn Manor lingered in their minds, but it no longer defined them. They had emerged from its grip stronger, more resilient. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they knew one thing for sure: they would face it together.